Okay, welcome to another motion breakdown video. Today we'll be doing the round 5 of McGill IV. This video actually took a long time to prepare and I really did give it a lot of thoughts, so I don't know how long this will be, but I really hope this helps you because a lot of time and effort went into this particular video, and we really do go into the depth not just about the particular motion but also these types of probabilities only motions. So, what's the motion? The motion is this house believes that peak globalization has already been reached. Or, if this were to be in the EUDC manual, it would be... actually, it wouldn't be a predicts motion. Okay, yeah, so, it's a general, value statement motion, I guess. But, predicting that it will not continue going forward. Okay, cool. So... before we get into statement generation and things like that, it's important to look at what are inherent features of this motion. So the first thing is that we're not supporting a significant decline or something like that. That's not the burden that we have on Gov. Just that there is a halt or a stop or maybe some kind of decrease based on this. I.e., our burden is to say the world can still be equally globalized as it is now. It just won't expand or won't continue that much to win the debate. Similarly, opposition in this debate doesn't have a burden to explain that maybe it will continue with the same trajectory, or maybe it will continue expanding to super high lengths, but it will just continue expanding. Secondly, this is a probabilities debate. So we're not analyzing if globalism is good or bad, but whether or not the phenomenon that we're talking about will happen, i.e. whether it will continue expanding or not. Thirdly is that the statements themselves are the mechanisms. Because this is a probabilities debate, we're just asking ourselves to generate reasons as to why something is true or why the statement is true. And it's we don't have to impact it or something like that. That's just taken out of the equation. And finally, as a setup, in our world, trade and bilateral trade agreements can still happen, or not just trade, but bilateral policies agreements between nations can still happen. It's not that, just not at the scale of globalism or not at it continuing and this type of things. So this is the burdens that we have on the motion. Why is this important to note? Because it's very easy for an opposition team to mischaracterize and misconstrue the things that you're saying, especially if this is in the North American circuit, because, this is the McGill IV and people strawman there a lot. So it's good to, obviously you don't have to say all of these things, but it may be good in setup to explain this is the burdens that we have, this is what we're defending. Do not let them misconstrue what we're trying to say and things like that. Cool. So I kind of screwed up my slides, but what is inherent to globalism? That's the question here. So why are we asking ourselves this question? Let's start from there. I think a lot of teams, when they're debating these types of motions, they go directly into the mechanization part, but they don't necessarily think about what is the inherent features of the thing that we are discussing. And this is important because otherwise what we are doing as a mistake is we're just throwing a bunch of mechanisms out there and we're hoping that they stick or we're hoping that they win or things like that. Rather than we should analyze what are the inherent features of globalism so that we are best able to particularly outline what are the metrics or bullet points or whatever you like to use, and just explain that these things will either stop or decrease as time goes on. It will never peak to those levels again. So basically the inherent characteristics, there are obviously more, but there are three broad inherent characteristics that we can debate about: economic globalization, political globalization, cultural globalization. Let's look at economic globalization. This inherently has more free trade between nations, more integrated supply chain, more financial integration, so things like common currencies, pegging currencies, and things like that, so that countries have a greater interconnected trade. So basically, the opposite of this would be less free trade, less integrated supply chains, and less financial integration of this. Obviously, there are more components to this, but these are just very good examples to showcase this. Second thing is that there's aspects of political globalization. So this is like having institutional power to world institutions, like for example the UN, the WTO, the IMF. That these organizations have like a say and homogeny in internal policies of countries, or like internal or like what happens around the world. The second thing towards this is that like there is an implementation of global laws and rules-based orders. So like if you look at, for example, this may sound like a trivial example, but the IP laws motion on round 9 of Madrid WDC is basically this: that there is an inherent internationalizations of standards, procedures, and processes and laws that are followed by multiple countries that multiple countries agree with. And finally, military cooperation between countries. This could be against like terrorist threats. This could be against rogue states. This could be interventions in countries like, let's say, Haiti right now, that is talked about it happening, and all of these things. So like political globalization means the general integration of countries to collective institutions like the UN, WTO, focusing on implementation of rules, policies, guidelines, and military cooperation. So the reverse of this is less power to these institutions, less power to such norms and rules, or countries not following them, and less military cooperation between countries. So like this is how we set up as what the current feature is, and how it will most likely decrease, or what it will look like. And finally, cultural globalization, which is reduction in nationalism, people thinking that they're citizens of the world, global media information sharing, people watching and listening to the same things, and in general, like becoming culturally homogenous. Like for example, if you talk to a Zoomer from the United States, a Zoomer from Europe, a Zoomer from another place, they would like have equal Zoomer talks between each other with the no cap thing and stuff like that, because they're equally influenced. Bottom line is that each of these things can be a path to victory if you prove that they like either don't increase or they just decrease, right? This is the way that we're setting it up. And if you flag this to the judge, like, judge, there are 3 inherent characteristics: economic, political, cultural. You don't have to go through all of these things. But like, let's give an example with economics. Globalization means like free trade and integration of supply chains between countries. If we prove to you that this decreases, or it will stay the same, it will not increase, then this is an inherent feature of globalism that isn't met, that we can win the debate, and things like that. So yeah, so this is something, this in comparison to, just going into the argument explaining how tariffs, how there are more tariffs, how, for example, there's more protectionism and things like that, without doing this setup, or without outlining why this wins the debate, or why this is an issue that if you win on it, the judge should give it to you, is like a mistake, and you need to do it in order to prove this argument. Cool. So let's get into proving each of these things. So, basically, sorry, before that, I get my slides on. This took a very long time to make. Basically, to prove each of these things, we need to generate statements. So, like, there are, I think, 9 statements that I was able to generate this time, that all of them go to these particular issues. So, here's what we're going to do. We're basically going to briefly look at them, and then I'm going to analyze each and every one of these. So, when we look at, for example, economics, we see rise of protectionist policies and politicians. Economies decrease their dependence and focus more inward, and there are many supply chain disruptions and reorientations. So these are like 3 statements that prove that like globalization would either go down or continue to at least not increase or continue up. Political national sovereignty is being challenged all around the world. You have skepticism towards international institutions and countries pulling away, and you have a rise of populism internally. And finally, culturally, people are becoming more hostile to other groups. Social media creates echo chambers, and inherently people have differences between each other. So like, these are the statements that I was able to generate. Obviously, if you generated something else, feel free to run and analyze that as well. But these are the ones that I think are like the most crucial, and I'll focus on them. That doesn't mean that yours may be wrong or something like that. This is just the ones that I choose to focus on. Cool. So let's look at economic with the first reason, which is there is a rise in protectionist policies and politicians. Why is this true? Why will this continue to happen? The basic, there are a couple of strains of analysis here. The first is that the working class has experienced the negative effects of globalization. This is them literally losing their jobs because factories are reorienting in different parts of the world where labor is cheaper. There's even like a stereotypical understanding of this. When you say the word Rust Belt, this literally people connected with the Rust Belt area around the United States where factory workers used to be. And like basically these people, because they lose their job, they live a very bad life. Like literally this may be the only employment they have. They have to work comparatively worse jobs. Maybe some of them turn to crime. They're unable to pay their bills and things like that. And in general, this creates a lot of political will within this particular group of people. That's the working class. That are many people. They're a huge part of society. And with also working class supporters. So, people that, for example, maybe they themselves are not working class, but they understand, they see the problems, and they would like them to have jobs and stuff like that, which generates enough political will for these politicians to prop up and capitalize on this particular group of people. Second reason why they prop up is that in general, this is also increased income inequality. So it has made certain groups of people richer, so they're able to benefit from these policies of like reorienting supply chains to other parts of the world where there is cheaper labor. So their bottom line is increased. They're able to get more money. So basically, they can pay themselves bonuses. They can pay themselves dividends. Their stock is appreciating, and the rich are becoming richer based upon these policies. But this doesn't necessarily trickle down to like the working class who now don't have employment, who don't have money to buy stocks or invest in these companies and do these things. So because of this, like the rich are becoming richer and the poor are becoming poorer. Add to this additional things like, let's say, inflationary crisis that happened in the last few years, like let's say cost of living increasing, and like people are generally very, very angry with this stuff. So towards this narrative, populists can also add the us versus them narrative to rally up this huge group of people and tell them, like, there is currently an establishment that is doing this. I'm going to fight this establishment. We know this is true because this is literally what Donald Trump did, word by word. This is the process. But also, thirdly, globalism as an aspect also means kind of free movement of people, not completely. Like, this has various degrees in various countries, but let's say for sure, because of the concept existing, people are now taking in, let's say, more foreign workers within Western Europe, and because they're cheaper labor, because the average Mexican, for example, in the States wants to work for, let's say, 6 times less than the average American, but for them, like, this is a huge amount of money. They're undercutting the work that is there. Like, if you watch the South Park episode, "They took our jobs," this is literally like the plot. And like, people basically have, like, working class Americans have less opportunities. Their labor is being undercut by migrants, which further increases the political capital in these particular things. So broadly, these are the reasons why there is significant political capital for protectionist policies. What are protectionist policies? Tariffs, taxes on goods, banning of certain goods, making it impossible for you to move, let's say, your business to another country and things like that. Basically, there are many examples of the policies that Trump did, but also in the future, there are likely other such politicians. So, like, let's say, because this narrative won't change, a Donald Trump plus may exist down the line, which means that they would want even more protectionist policies, more of these outcomes, and like enact even more such policies, which leads to more protectionism, which leads to a decrease in economic globalization. Second reason here is that there is a decrease in dependence and focusing inwards of different countries. So basically, how does the mechanism work? Interdependence of the countries and in terms of their trading. So this is, for example, you buying a lot of goods from China because China makes them cheaper, means that if tomorrow, let's say, the United States decides to impose some kind of tax on these goods, like let's say how Trump imposed a 300% tax, I think it was on Chinese steel, then this could have massive economic harms to China, because their buyers are all of a sudden asking for huge amounts of money for them to import this type of stuff, and vice versa, also United States from China, means that this is a significant risk to you, and unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on who you ask, it does happen. And in general, this creates a vicious cycle of action and counteraction. So because one country decides to put these maybe sanctions as a one word to put it, these taxes, the other country wants to counterattack to like make sure that they have a strain on them. So then China would put a tax on, let's say, US imports or US services, or harm the United States in some other way, shape, or form, which then causes another counter reaction from the United States and creates a vicious cycle of these things. The second reason is protection of assets, because you have, let's say, a lot of factories in China, and the Chinese may decide to, for example, nationalize, let's say, these factories tomorrow, or forms a kind of regulation, or because, for example, you're afraid that they'll steal your intellectual property. This means that, for example, the United States has an incentive to pull away its factories down the line, or like curb and limit them and make it more inward. So bottom line is, countries have a natural incentive, a natural push, a natural fear because of basically this, how do I put this, this game theory of this prisoner's dilemma between them, of them screwing each other over, that naturally at a certain moment they'll look to be self-sustaining. So for example, the United States would like to be a self-sustaining economy, the Chinese would also like to be, and to be less dependent on this, or at least be dependent on countries that are closer within their reach. So maybe create bilateral agreements with, let's say, Mexico or Southern America, and the Chinese with countries that are closer to them, and it not to be so globalized where you're building one thing in one country, another thing in another country, then another thing in another country, and then forming a whole product. No, you'd like to centralize it more so that you are negating these risks. And finally, there are just simply a lot of global supply chain disruptions. After COVID, many countries like saw how fragile their supply chains are, and the future has a lot of uncertainty to it. We could have pandemics, wars, political crises, which means that countries have incentives to nearshore things, so like make them as close as possible. Because if you think about it, let's say we look at the example of building a plane, where you're building different parts of the plane in different countries and then manufacturing it all together. If something were to happen into one of these countries, like, I don't know, there's a civil war in one of them, or something else, or like a natural disaster or something like that, then you can't build the plane if you're missing some kind of parts, which means that then you have to reorientate your supply chain, which means that then there are like problems with that, prices go up, people like can't buy up goods because of that, and ultimately this plunges economies into crisis. So because this incentive exists, the risk is so high that you would not want to outsource or outshore that many of your supply chains. Now, Op may respond to this, but saying, but what about the profit? You know, like, well, aren't like companies and countries still profit motivated? Don't they want to do it because it will continue making money? Not necessarily. And there are broadly three ways to respond to this response. And I guess this would be the main argument coming from opposition. The first is that political systems and democracies don't only care about profit, and they balance multiple sets of incentives. That's to say that they do care about profit, obviously. Like you do care about it, and probably the way opposition would analyze it is companies care about profits, and because companies give money to politicians, politicians also care about profits. Plus, in order to increase your tax revenue, you need the businesses to increase as well. However, there are also other considerations that you're looking at too. For example, if you're voted out by the working class, it doesn't matter if the companies are paying you lots of money if you're not in power. And so if this is a significant risk to you, which in many cases it is, like this is a large pool of people that could sway elections if they have a single issue that pushes them, like for example, job loss and things like that, then that means that you most likely will curtail the amount of globalism that you do in order to like offset their anger. Or worse, you lose the election, someone like Trump comes into power, or Trump plus, who will now enact these policies, irrespective of whether or not they receive money from, let's say, big banks or things like that, or he can just say, no, I'm not receiving money from you, I don't care, I care about the working class, then that means that you are not prioritizing profit. So this is where these incentives don't align. Second way the incentives don't align is if certain things possess a security risk, i.e. if China, for example, is literally stealing your IP, and this is of strategic technological importance to you, whether it's some kind of infrastructure system, like let's say social media, whether it's a new technology that you're trying to make that could revolutionize the market, whether it's military technology or like civilian technology that has military use or something like this, then this means that you would prefer to make less of the profit and try to reorient this back if you think that this could potentially mean a risk to your civilians down the line. Again, this doesn't need to happen. The fact that this may happen could be a reason for you to do it. So this is the first way you respond. Secondly is that you on Gov we analyze long-term economic risks that outweigh benefits right now. And like this is basically the thesis that you're pushing, that if supply chain disruptions happens, if wars happen, if nationalization happens and things like this, and more it's proven to be fragile, then naturally governments and companies will reorient it to a more safer bet. Like all of this means that it just has to happen a couple of more times. It has already happened to a significant extent with COVID. That companies now want to be less risk averse and would like to reorientate globalism. And thirdly, like at the end of the day, there is marginal benefit to outsourcing. This marginal benefit is cheap labor. But if technology advances at a very okay speed, like let's say there are robots that can be used in factories or mines and things like that, and the way that I've analyzed this in the past, I'm by no means a technical expert. You can call me out in the comments if this is totally wrong. But from what I understand, transistors are doubling in power like every couple of years, which means that down the line we'll reach this point of like singularity where artificial intelligence will now be able to do robotic things and things like that, and they will be like they'll be stronger than humans. They can work all the time. They don't require upkeep. They don't have rights, meaning that yes, they may be more expensive, but after a certain moment they won't be that expensive to be created, which means that at a certain moment they'll overtake human labor, so there won't be that much benefit to you outsourcing. And there are many companies that are actually investing in robotics right now to do this. Or the nuance would be, if you're able to get rid of, let's say, the very, very cheap workforce, but you still need like humans to work as engineers and stuff like that, then it makes much more sense to have these factories in your own country, where you can hire these highly qualified workers to basically manage the robots, which will likely happen in the end. So that way you undercut the profit analysis coming from opposition and you win this clash. Cool. So this is on economics. Let's look at politics. And I would just like to start by saying this is probably the easiest one to win, which is that the power of international institutions currently is an absolute all-time low. Like you have wars all around the world, Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan, Haiti, small Middle East skirmishes between Pakistan, Iran, and Afghanistan all the time happen. Basically, these institutions really can't do anything about it. Like they don't have a private army that they could deploy or something like that, or some kind of collective military force. They're very hesitant. And the reason for this is they're comprised of states that have a collective action problem between themselves. The collective action problem is these like institutions only work if you have a majority, if not all of these states cooperating together, i.e. the UN only has legitimacy so far as countries are willing to opt in and work around these rules and things like that. But also, here's the collective action problem. The benefits of this, so like having a rules-based order of things, having procedures and ways of operating, like saying war is illegitimate and taking territories via war is an illegitimate tactic. Like this is literally a rule that's in the UN Charter. Can only work, like can only manifest as a benefit if all countries agree to these particular sets of rules. So we have a buy-in problem where benefits arise only if major countries opt in, but this can only work if major countries opt in. So basically, the collective action problem is, what if some states just decide not to follow the rules, right? Like, what if they decide to be that in the trade-off they would prefer to do this? Like, this is, for example, another situation that, thank God, hasn't become a war yet, but literally the Venezuela and Guyana situation, where Venezuela literally wants to annex a huge proportion of the land there because they found oil, basically, and they see huge economical benefits of annexing this territory. If this country were to, for example, not care tomorrow and decide to invade and annex it, let's say the international community has a bunch of tools and mechanisms that they can depose, sanctions and things like that. But this country has been sanctioned for so long already, which means that the only thing that you have left as an option is to deploy soldiers and boots on the ground and create a military intervention. However, there is this thing called the UN Security Council that can't really agree between each other for doing this type of thing, because it's comprised of multiple superpowers that have diametrically opposed incentives. And even if, for example, the Russians and the Chinese could be pro-invasion, like pro-intervention, they'll just say no because they want to exert pressure on the United States and Western Europe. Solely on the principle basis, or at least to get them to have concessions on the conflicts that they are trying to deploy. And if this, let's say, were to be an additional conflict, and then in another territory, an additional conflict props up and things like that, and you have no inherent mechanism of controlling this type of things, then these institutions become less and less important down the line. People less and less care about them, and after a certain moment, countries will simply start pulling away and not caring about them and looking internally inward, trying to defend themselves. Opposition may respond to this by saying, okay, but why did it work so far? And the reason is, the only reason this has worked, well, worked in brackets, if you really count this working, if you count, for example, the United States forming a military intervention in a couple of countries without getting UN security clearance, like if you count this as working, but let's say you count this as completely working, the reason it has worked was because after the 90s and the 2000s, the United States won the Cold War. So there wasn't any diametrical opposition of countries. It was hegemony of one particular country. But this has changed, obviously. Like, you have rise of China, you have the return of the Russian Federation as similar to how they used to operate during the Soviet Union, if they ever changed at all, which means that this rules-based order is challenged. These two superpowers, or like these sets of superpowers, have different incentives between each other, and they break the rules all the time. Meaning that, like, I know this is really pretty long to explain, but for you to get the point, after a certain moment, these institutions become less and less powerful, and so like the globalism aspect of integrating multiple countries into one singular institution also fails. And this is just militarily, but it also applies for other things. Climate change initiatives, IP laws, and systemization of this also apply. That you can't really resolve if you don't have buying from multiple countries. Which then brings to the second thing, which is that countries simply become self-interested and they look inwards. So, for example, they do things like remilitarize. For example, they do things like pulling away from these types of treaties and seeing no benefits in cooperation, preferring to be risk-averse, and stuff like that. And finally, you just simply get the rise of populists like Trump. Here you can literally copy-paste the same analysis that we did for economical aspect, but now add to this political ramification, military ramifications, where they say things like, we have to think for ourselves, and we should look at what our interests are in this particular moment, or the international community can't do anything, and stuff like that. And then you, like, basically the bottom line of this whole analysis is that these organizations and institutions will at least not continue to expand, but for sure will most likely dismantle. Like, it's very hard from opposition to argue that this won't happen to a certain extent in the future, seeing what's going on now. Finally, culturally, the first and most basic line of analysis here is that people will still continue having a strong sense of nationalism in them. And I guess here I see that I have an audience all around the world. Maybe from people who are from Western Europe, it's pretty hard to understand because you people aren't that nationalistic. But for all the viewers all across the world, and you probably know that even though you are in this very cool revolution of Netflix, euphoria, and shit like that you're watching that make you a citizen of the world, you're still pretty much nationalistic, right? You still pretty much care about your country because, firstly, this is propagated by institutions, like, for example, the state, the family, your religion. They tell you how important it is your country. They teach you that it's important to die for your country and things like that. That still have a hold on you, that still have a grip on you. Maybe this is less so in the West, but definitely all around the other countries this is happening. And secondly, people are just untrustful of foreign things to them, right? Like, if you've grown up in a situation where you've never saw a foreigner, you aren't necessarily exposed to some ideas, and you finally see one, you're untrustful of them. You don't really think what exactly they'll do. So even if all of this like positive reinformation and messaging happens, people are still to a large extent internally looking. They care about their own country and or their own community. They don't necessarily care about being multicultural citizens of the world. Second, very simple line here is that social media creates division because algorithms push us into echo chambers. Firstly, people in different parts of the world literally see different things. So I see one thing, you in Korea, or in Bangladesh, or in Mexico, or in Western Europe see things totally different from me. Like you see news that's local to you. You see certain political viewpoints that are very, very different from mine. Which inherently makes us not cooperative and not on the same page, and actually have different value strands and different things. And due to the nature of algorithms, we can't come to a place to discuss these type of things because we're echo chambered with people that are like-minded like us, where we get a positive reaffirmation on the things that we are thinking, and we are not seeing any criticism. And this ultimately leads to making division, whether it's internally within the country, externally within the world. People are more and more divided. People are more and more within this narrative of us versus them, and people are more and more opposed to this type of things. Meaning that people look inward. People prefer to look at what is themselves and their own self-interest rather than the interest of the general planet and the general world. Meaning that internally people are less susceptible to this type of globalism. Most likely there'll be a U-turn. Okay, cool, great. I know this was like a lot of content, and obviously you don't like, the point is you can't really run all of this in a prime minister speech, right? Like, this is just what you could run from OG and what you could then extend on closing government, depending on what the opening government missed. I didn't do weighing between different issues, but maybe that's something that you can try to do on your own. Ultimately, all of these things are kind of similar in importance when we're talking about globalism as a concept, because, you know, it's like so broad. It talks about so many things. But yeah, I hope this was helpful. I hope you now understand the probabilities debates much better. And yeah, see you in the next video.